Chapter 5 The Balance of Truth. The lunch was nothing fancy. They attended the noodle shop across the street and sat at one of the small tables near the window once they had their orders. Alice was a master of the small banter that pervaded the shop clientele, and tugged the two through the line and to their seats with rounded remarks of ambiguous opinion regarding trite matters such as television shows and media personalities. Once at the table, however, the superficial veil dropped, and an air of intimacy overtook the conversation, propelled by Alice, and causing an immediate switching of emotion for Bethany. "So you realize that you were leaning on your sister and mother with those phone calls, and now that you see how you depend on them, you're having a little trouble accepting that role," Alice said, concluding the statement with a fork tangled in rounded noodles to her lips. Like a reaction to the stimulus, Bethany halted the raising of her utensil and spoke. "I'm not having trouble accepting it," but she thought better of her reaction as she lowered her fork. "I don't know, maybe I am. It's just," she shifted in her seat, "I'm usually the one that's the rock, and the other two always counted on me. I mean, I'm the most successful in the family, and I'm used to being the one who is certain, the strong voice, you know?" Alice nodded while chewing. "But now," Bethany continued, "it's like I've intruded into their lives, like my grief is not worth their time." "You don't believe that," Alice said. "No, I don't," Bethany admitted. "I guess I'm trying to find reason to be angry with them." Bethany took a bite. "They're family, hon. I'm sure you have tons of reasons to be angry with them, but we both know this isn't one of those reasons. It is more likely that you inadvertently remind them of their own frailty in this situation. You should know they probably can hear your vulnerability in your voice. And because you were always the strong one, or so you say, it scares them a little to think that you may require something from them that they cannot provide, that your strength required answers that they don't have, or would hurt them too much to admit to." Bethany had taken 2 bites while Alice spoke, and now contemplated while picking through her food with her fork. "What could I possibly need answers to?" she asked. Alice gave a half smile. "I can't answer that. It's your individual nature that has to voice those questions." She put her fork down. "Every person reacts differently to death in their lives. Everyone has similar uncertainties as to what comes after death. But how we react to it when we must see it, that differs from person to person." "So therapy is in my future?" Bethany asked. "If that's what you need, or feel you need, in order to continue being happy, then yes." Alice picked up her fork. "But I think the counsel offered in conversation can help also." They were silent for a few moments as Alice ate and Bethany thought while continuing to pick at her food. "I guess," Bethany began as Alice finished her bite and listened. Bethany looked from the food in front of her to Alice. "I guess my deep question is one that doesn't get answered easily. It's a why question, and I doubt anyone would want to tackle it." Alice sighed. "Whys are usually tough to find accurate answers to, but sometimes," she smiled, "we can find solace in the inaccurate answers from our friends." Bethany was touched by Alice's reference to their being friends, and decided not to wonder if pity for her situation is what brought on the new designation, and simply roll with the conversation. All right, she said with a smile that dropped as she leaned onto the table. Why does there have to be death? What reason is there for death to be part of life? Bethany asked. Alice sat back and raised her eyebrows. She puffed her cheeks and lips as she exhaled heavily, understanding the weight of the question posed to her and her responsibility to answer the young, talented lady. Wow, I guess I asked for that. Bethany leaned back. You don't have to answer, she said. It's not something that can readily be discussed over lunch. No, no, Alice said, portraying her insistence on taking up the challenge. I offered and prodded, and you deserve my thought on the matter. She leaned forward and spoke with great care and thought. I guess death is needed because it reminds us that we are finite, and that reminder inspires us to make the most of our lives, to do those things which make for a thoroughly satisfying life, and maybe to remind us how important every moment alive truly is. Death gives meaning to life, a meaning that wouldn't be there if life never ceased. And maybe there is an afterlife that allows an eternal sense of being, but death being the cessation of all that we have to indicate life leaves it unknowable. That would be another reason. No matter how much we learn and know, there is always one unknowable sector within our perception. One thing that we can't ever know about because it is the absolute opposite of everything we define ourselves as. Alice shifted a little while thinking, seeming to avoid her own discomfort over the thought of ever ceasing to be. And there's that meaning to life again. By remission of life, death gives us the insurmountable value of life. She looked out the window. While alive, we can guess at what is important, and usually assume specific qualities of life are important, and perhaps they are for specific situations. She looked back at Bethany. It's important to know how to drive if you're navigating midtown traffic, but I can't imagine knowing how to drive is all that important for someone who lives in the way out there where cars aren't used. Bethany nodded so her friend would continue. But the important qualities of life, the ones that may very well be why we have life at all, those qualities may be more subtle than we realize. We tend to think our perceptions, what we see and hear and smell and feel and taste, we think that those senses are important. What if, though, we have those senses while we are alive to help us form ideas, and those ideas being passed from one person to others is the reason for life? Alice looked at her food. Here I've gone and convoluted your question, she said. You asked me about death, and I'm telling you about the reason for life. No, please, go on, Bethany pressed. We only have terms of life to communicate with, so it's fine, she sputtered quickly. Alice smiled gently, with the understanding between the two. Well, it seems death becomes the truest test of an idea's validity. On one hand, when a person who housed an idea passes on, if the idea continues through the perceptions of others, then the idea gains a modicum of validity. On the other hand, if there is an idea in a person's head and it makes it through the emotional turmoil of a loved one dying, then that idea is going to be worth looking into. Alice leaned back and teetered precariously over a tearful expression. When I lost my father, there were a few times that I thought I wouldn't make it through, and would forever see the world as a gray and cold, harsh and lonely place. But then I remembered the vibrant times and joys from parts of my life spent with him. And the idea of keeping that feeling present for me and others to know it, that kept me going. She sniffed and wiped a tiny tear from her right eye. Life should be lived as a courageous and celebratory defiance of death. And we would not have something to defy if death were not part of life. Alice adjusted herself in her seat and raised her head slightly. That may be the reason. They looked at each other. Alice smiled and looked down, clumsily picking up her fork and tangled a group of noodles around the tines. Bethany exhaled deeply and picked up her fork. "Wow," she said. "I guess I asked for that." She looked up at Alice, and they both smiled. "I hope that helps," Alice said. "It does," Bethany answered, focusing on her fork. "Now, tell me," Alice said just prior to taking another bite, "how did your question match up to the calls to your mother and sister?" Bethany twirled her fork to wrap the noodles for a bite. "I guess I thought they would both want to talk with me about things, about what was going on, like the conversations would be a reminder of Dad." Maybe they were. And maybe they were infused enough with a reminder to invigorate them to action, Alice said. "Your strength may play to your disadvantage in this case." Bethany was chewing her forkful of noodles. "You need more of a reminder before you are moved to action, and your family does not require the same extent of invigoration." "Well, I'm lucky, then, to have you," Bethany said. Alice depicted clearly the happiness she derived from the flattery with a degree of sincerity in her smile that Bethany had not seen before. "Indeed, you may be lucky," Alice said. "So let me give you this advice, so that you don't recall this conversation being only deep and concerning the dreariness of death. Get out and do something. Go to a museum, go to a show, go see some live music. Go do something that is not a planned endeavor. Something that gives at least a glimpse, if not a full gulp, of the disorganization of life. Because, Bethany," Alice reached her hand across and placed it on Bethany's hand, commanding her friend's full attention. "The structure and forms of living that you work so masterfully are only one part of it. And it could be argued exist only to give us a feeling of being in some sort of control. But the truth is that life is a chorus of disorganization, where cacophony is the norm, harmony is the exception, and unison is scarce." Bethany looked away, but Alice shook her hand to keep her attention a bit longer. "But the wholly organic quality of the disorganization is exhilarating, and the exuberance of life is evident in those who dare to never lose that feeling of life being so precious in defiance of death." Alice retracted her hand, blushing slightly that she had overstepped her bounds. Feeling the embarrassment of Alice, Bethany spoke. "I understand what you're saying, but I can't just go on a bender to forget about my father's death." "Of course not," said Alice. "But you can temper some appreciation for the vibrant, outlandish, and sometimes opulent qualities of life. In the very least, they are sufferable distractions, and at their very best, they provoke ideas and evoke feelings. Bethany was chewing. And they beat the alternative of cleaning your bathroom at 2 o'clock in the morning. Bethany stopped chewing and watched Alice engulf the noodle-laden fork and crack a good-natured, tight-lipped smile. Bethany couldn't help but return the smile, and felt good doing such.